Hey, friends, it's Mark here with Youth Talks, and Tyler is nowhere to be found. I think he's still alive, though, so don't send any notes to his wife and worry his young child. I think he's all right, but I've got a special guest host with me today. Jason Giantoli is here live with us. So, hey, Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well today, Mark. Just another day of Groundhog's Day. If you've seen that movie, then that's kind of been my life every day for 2 months. So it's pretty good.
Hmm.
I'll
Yeah, do
take
you think you're a god yet?
No, no, I haven't tried. I haven't tried any of the crazy stuff because I am sane enough to know that I don't just get to come
All
back.
right, so you're thinking it's like
Yeah,
that, but it's not actually Groundhog Day.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I do like that part where someone asks him, he says, "You sound like God." And he says,
Yeah. Uh-oh.
kind of act like they sort of are a god a little bit, but maybe that's just my notion on it. But anyways, this is the show where we are going to say goodbye to a good friend, not Tyler, but actually our good friend Mario has been part of our church here for a long time, and part of our broadcast is actually making some work changes for himself, got some neat opportunities coming up. And so we've been just super thankful for all the parts he's played here, and shouts out to Mario. So you can send that. If you have comments, you can send out your thanks to Mario for all that he's done. But we're so grateful for all that he's done, but excited about his new opportunity in the future. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that as things go that way. And this also could be the show where Mark was reminded that change is the only constant. Have you ever heard that before, Jason?
I
Change
have
is
heard
the only
that.
constant.
Yeah, yep, I have heard that.
Yeah. Does that have any does that resonate in your life at all, or are you kind of, is that not the way you look at life necessarily?
Well, again, not for the last couple of months because a lot of things have been very similar. But yeah, I
Uh-huh.
mean, getting used to the fact that things change, life changes, that's going to be what you expect. So if you get kind of
Mhm.
in too much of a pattern, and even like with what's going on now, I know that life will change as we go back to school in the fall, and I'm already like kind of mentally preparing myself that that's going to be hard to do to head back to school. Even on my kids, I've been talking to them about like, you only work for like 2 hours a day, you're done, you have a ton of free time, we'd be going
Oh,
for
that's your
another 4
schedule right now? Oh, I'm so
Well,
sorry.
yeah,
I'm not going to
for
call
the
your
kids.
principal on it and tell him that, but
No, no,
I've heard.
that was for the kids, not for
Oh,
me.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not just 2 hours a day. All right. Wink, wink.
Well, yeah, might be an hour and a half, but
Okay. No, I do know some teachers have made themselves available from like 8 in the morning till 8 at night, like 12-hour days for communication with students. So in all honesty, that's kind of a grind if you're dropped into that scenario.
yeah, it's different because like I'll have my Chromebook open, and so I'm not directly teaching, but it's constantly responding to things. And I was talking to another teacher that, on any given weekend, I usually kind of leave work at work, and so I'm not doing any schoolwork on weekends. But even this past Memorial weekend, I was doing something on Sunday afternoon, and I was talking to
Mhm.
another teacher, and so it just kind of changes when you do your work. So yeah,
Nice. Absolutely. Yeah, if people didn't know, Jason has been an education specialist, a teacher, a cultural consultant of sorts.
oh, there you go.
Special title for some. How long have you been a public school teacher, Jason? Actually,
This wraps up my 19th year.
19th year. Okay. Do you have energy for 19 more?
No, no, I don't. That
Do
too
you
quick
have?
of an answer? I probably was too fast. I do, yeah, of course.
It's out there. I'm sorry, it's been
Say
released.
no to
You
that. Yeah,
Cat's
no,
out of the bag, but
yeah. I
yeah.
dream of just mowing lawns on a riding
Mhm.
lawnmower someday. So that's
Uh-huh. All right.
transition out of teaching someday to
All right.
mowing lawns. Yep.
That'd be cool. You just get them and actually get, I mean, some of the properties around town here, these people are like grass farmers. So literally you could be mowing all
Yeah.
day long
Yep.
on that. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, that's good. So what about that? Maybe you're saying that in jest, but what about that appeals to you, that the quietness or the activity like that? What's appealing about that for you personally?
Oh, for me, it's
Yeah.
the like that I'm more of an introverted kind of person, and so it's kind of doesn't fit with teaching that I sort of can pretend to be more of an extrovert in class, or if I have to do something like this. But I really love, during this time of quarantine or whatever, I'm often outside. I put my headphones on. I turn on some. Lately, it's been 70s folk music, and
Uh-huh.
Cat Stevens is playing, and I'm working in the garden or weeding or mowing the lawn, and I like that kind of
Mhm.
just quietness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, there's certainly something appealing about that, the generalized activity. of life can get to all of us in that regard. So, why may I ask you then? Why originally did you get did teaching? Was that like a default option, like you were going to be something, and then, well, I could always teach, or was teaching something? How did that originate for you? Like,
Yeah,
well, I could always teach, so
yeah, just
can't
do
do
that.
anything else. But no.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I don't know. I went through. I don't know. I'm sure, like a lot of kids, they go through high school. I had certain jobs that I just saw. I saw what my dad did. I saw obviously a bunch of what teachers did, and then you always had doctors, lawyers, things like that. And so once I went off to college, I think I had the idea of I wanted to be a teacher, but then I kind of second guessed myself and thought, well, maybe I'm only saying that because that's really something that I know a lot
Mhm.
about, and I should think about some other things. So I started to pursue a degree in political science at the University of Washington and was just about done.
Right.
And then I decided to switch, kind of against what, probably good advice that some people gave me. Transferred to Central and just realized I really did want to be a teacher. That's what appealed to me. And I'll be honest. I mean, there's lots of different components. I mean, obviously the schedule of a teacher is really nice, but the
Mhm.
impact also on top of that that you can make with some kids is good too. So yeah,
Oh, the connection that way, yeah.
yeah.
So you were starting in political science. So what mightn't you have done with political science? Were you going to
You
be like
know,
an attorney or something, or
yeah, no, I wouldn't have
government
gone.
official,
I wouldn't have
president?
gone to law school because I would have been probably a little too lazy. But I had the idea. I had a friend whose dad was a federal probation officer, so I kind of thought about that direction. But I
Uh-huh.
also just thought about, at that time, thought it would be fun to work on political campaigns or in political
Mhm.
offices and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, just decided
So
to
you
go.
have not gotten that bug back? I mean, to be political at all? Do you consider
Oh,
yourself a political
no,
person at all?
I used to be kind of a like to the point of when Shannon and I were first married. I was like a political junkie. I watched a lot of the political news shows, and
Mhm.
I just realized it wasn't very good for me,
Yeah.
personally. Just the way
Mhm.
I would then maybe present myself as far as being a little more argumentative and things like
Okay.
that. And so I kind of let it go. I'm sure I still have tons of opinions and things like that, but
I'm sure. I'm sure you do. We'll
yeah,
certainly hear perhaps more of them. But
yeah.
now that's sort of a family thing, isn't it? The bantering back and forth, is that's part of your family dynamic?
For sure. Growing up, I definitely we argued a lot about a lot of things. Not in a bad way. I mean, when you say argue, it makes it sound bad, but we
Yeah,
always
that's unfortunate. I think that's a problem that we have sometimes in communication, that to have a debate or an argument is considered necessarily negative, and it isn't necessarily negative to argue. It can't we but we tend to think of it that way. I don't know why that is exactly. Why did arguing just get to be like a negative thing? Do you know?
well, I would get. I mean, I can tell a little bit just from maybe personal experience because even as I grew up and my dad and I could banter back and forth about politics, sports, whatever, and then as Shannon and I were early married, she would be kind of surprised to see like my dad and I really wrestling around with the topic, and they'd just be able to be like, "All right, love you, Dad, see ya." And
Yeah,
it
see you
was
later.
sort of foreign to her to
Right.
to be like, wow, it seemed like you guys were getting kind of heated there, and but it really was just I think so once you let it get to that heated point, and if you
Mhm.
can't let people have a different opinion, then it starts to be more confrontational, I guess. But
Yeah, I suppose so. And a lot of that's dynamic, what you're comfortable with. But I think the underlying thing, perhaps in your statement, is the idea of family. If there's something deeper than just the topic you're discussing, you realize at the end of the day we're still connected. And I know you lost your father recently, and I know that's um,
yeah, yeah,
been a difficult thing because you had a lot of connection with him, and then you were certainly blessed in that way, because a lot of men don't have a very deep connection with their father. And that's not that it was perfect, but the ability to actually talk with him a lot was something that was part of it. I was wondering, did your dad have much to do with your uh, um, job choices, and career choices? Did you engage him in those conversations at all?
yeah. If I think back, I don't remember that for sure. I think, like I said, I kind of went with the path of teaching kind of early on, and
Mhm.
I think he worked in like kind of state government jobs, like employment security,
Right.
Department of Health, those kind of jobs, and he had some elements like early on he coached some sports and stuff, and so just that even that kind of like serving people, I guess was maybe a little bit of like the path to take, and
Mhm.
so yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, but I mean, you have that heart. I mean, teaching has to be that. I think if there isn't a heart in the end that you want the best for other people, you get to be kind of a crabby teacher at some point, if you don't
Right.
really care
Yeah.
about what you're doing. How likely, I mean, how much of, and again, we're not pointing to any particular teacher, but in general, in the in the nature of teaching or the group of teachers that, if you took 100 teachers, I mean, how many of them really have a heart, for people that motivates them, as opposed to I kind of just ended up here and this is what I'm doing and whatever. I mean, is it most teachers have this deeper, kind of movement inside them to do something good for people?
Yeah, and I think and I do, and I think it's different for different teachers. So for me, I get almost to maybe like a fault a little bit that I get really passionate about, making sure kids can read and write really well. And some of the kids in the stream will be, that are listening or in my class or have been in my class. And, I'm really like, okay, you guys, these are things that I want you to learn just so that you have a future to kind of pick what you want to do. And so sometimes I might focus too much on the content piece versus maybe the relationship piece sometimes. But I
Mhm.
think in every way, the teachers have some sort of, connecting point that they have with the kids. And, just to put a plug in for the school I teach at, Frontier is just filled with people who are, trying to connect with kids, make their experience to be something that they can like, attach to. And it's kind of goes throughout multiple different classes, kind of
Mhm.
depending on what a kid would be connected to. Some
Right.
kids aren't going to connect as much to English class just because of the subject, and some might connect more to history or science or math or
Mhm.
the electives. And so, yeah, no, I think there's definitely that heart. Yeah.
Well, that's nice, and I certainly, appreciate that there's people there that actually, want to be involved in teaching, because it's certainly a challenging nature. I mean, it requires a lot. I had a question. I've been thinking a lot about, the particular environment we're in out of school, and the suspension of time. And, again, there's a certain measure of students that can engage the sort of online content. There's obviously a lot of students that aren't going to do very well at that. They're going to come from homes that don't really put a lot of emphasis on, tracking what their kids are doing. And there's a couple of points with that, but my main thing is, if you look to, not getting back to school, kids in school, and that's part of it, this thing with the virus. You have this nature of expressing, well, we don't want anybody to die, and the kids probably aren't going to die, but they might be related to somebody who's older and cause this, so then therefore we shouldn't go back. But which is a topic of its own. But I'm thinking about the students losing that schooling opportunity. I mean, how detrimental is it for an average student to be out of school, in a normal thing for months potentially, or a year of time? I mean, where would that put a student, an average student, if they couldn't have that time in school?
Yeah, and that's like I think that's a very like complex answer as to what that would be,
Mhm.
because as far
Right.
as like content goes, I have a subject that for English I can deliver fairly well online. I mean, I make lots of videos and I can go step by step. It's not as physically hands on, and kids can respond to me. But the kids that are doing the best in that environment are often the kids that are coming from homes where the schooling is a priority, and also as a backup they can go to mom and dad to get help. So
Right.
like even for my kids, if they have a question about anything, they don't necessarily have to ask their teacher. We can help them out and kind of work through it. We have the
Right.
time to do it. We're not in some situation where we're off having to go do
Mhm.
something different. And so for those other kids, it's tough. I mean, I have a lot of kids that they haven't engaged this really at all, and so it's going to be tough. And then there's just other factors that aren't necessarily things that I'm really privy to. But I have a friend who works in like child protective services, and
Right.
talks about how like during the school year the number of calls is much higher, and then once summertime hits the calls drop off. Well, the reason why is there's just a lot more, like reporters, because teachers are interacting with kids and things like that. And especially
Right.
maybe even more so, I think, at the elementary school level. I don't,
Right.
I'm sure. But I talked to him recently, and again, with the school being out, the calls have dropped off down to, the level, like really low levels.
Right.
And so there's just those other things that, kids can be in some pretty bad spots.
Mhm.
So
What
there's
percentage of your
battle over
student yeah. What percentage of your students fall into that, maybe less involved home life and
time.
category for them? I mean, is it half the
Yeah.
students are like that? More than half?
And the part of the issue a little bit probably too with this one is that this is a unique situation. I don't know what it would be like, next year in the fall, if this was like a full-time, commitment to teach this way, or if we had some
Right.
kids, because when we left, everybody that's doing this is doing it on a pared back level, meaning that, for English for my class, which would be 5 days a week, the real instruction is for me to put out 2 lessons a week or 2 things a week. And they can be longer, time periods. They don't have to just be individual lessons every day. But so obviously that's cutting that down, by quite a bit. I mean, you're only doing
Right.
40% or whatever. And
Mhm.
so there, and then there's this idea too with the grading that you can't really do any, harm. So some people may have made choices to just say, we're okay with not doing the work because it's not
Right.
necessarily going to impact. So,
Sure, absolutely.
uh, yeah, and so it's a good, and it just depends. I mean, I have some classes where the participation level is pretty high. I have some that's it's pretty low, and we've reached out and tried, and I think for some of the kids too, we sent out big lists and have tried to make sure that kids have been contacted, and some of the kids are engaging in like some classes, but maybe not others. So they might gravitate towards back to some, maybe they had a connection with the teacher, the subject, whatever it is, and that might be a class that they actually do spend some time with, and then maybe they you know, don't do their English class. And so
Right.
it definitely varies, but this would not be a sustainable way to do this. It would not be, there's just not enough participation for it to be
Right.
something that would continue on. And I went down to school and I was talking about that today, that, what it would look like. I even said this to
Mhm.
my kids again, that if they, if there was some hybrid model next year, and again, nobody knows what's going to happen, but it wouldn't look like
Right.
this. It wouldn't look like you have, an hour and a half of work each day. It would be, more of a
Right.
4, 5, 6 hour day, like a regular school
Right.
day.
Which
So
is, I mean, which kids, students are going to, and again, my daughter's, at the high school level taking some AB classes, and they've had more work in those advanced
right,
placement classes than other students have had necessarily in the regular classes. But yeah, and again, I don't know, the way people talk about it, there's a great deal of divide over the nature of this. What does it really mean? What does the coronavirus really mean to the world? Again, you throw it out. We don't want anyone to die. No one can die. And I'm
right,
like, well, okay, apparently you haven't lived in the world very long because people die all the time. I've mentioned it several times on here. There's like 230,000 people that die every month in the United States,
right.
every single
Yeah,
month. There's like 3 million, 3.5 million people die every year of
yeah,
something. So, but it's interesting to me is that I especially look at it, from a Christian perspective. If somebody is a non-believer, they look at this life as all there is. There isn't anything else. So death is the greatest evil
oh
of
yeah,
all,
yeah,
and even look at that, even if in your own life, when you're touched by death, if you have a true faith, and again, that doesn't take away the loss and what that means of the person in our lives, but at least somewhere in there in the Christ story, there's hope. But I mean, you see so much depending where people are coming from. And again, we're in our small little community. I can't imagine being in major metropolitan areas, the kind of emphasis on these things. But is there any talk about next year? I mean, is that what they're doing or what they think is
yeah.
going to
I mean,
happen?
they're talking as a teacher. I don't know. I mean, I went down to the school, and there's the big committee. I mean, I'm reading Seattle Times articles. There's a committee that's working on what the proposals might be. That might be
Right.
several different possibilities depending on like the school situation or your community situation. So yeah, it's going to be it'll be an odd summer just because normally, and again, I'm somebody who again takes advantage of having a summertime off, that I can completely disengage and be enjoying summer and family and all of that. But it'll be different because you'll be kind of constantly thinking about like what's next as far as, and a lot of people have that same situation with their job. They don't know what's next. And
Right.
so, but it'll just be a different kind of summer that way because we won't
Yeah.
know. And I bet we won't know. I don't know. They might come out with the recommendations sometime in June, and then districts figuring it out sometime by in July. But yeah.
Do you know where that comes? I mean, the authority to decide, is that, district to district, or does that come from the state superintendent? I mean, how does that, those kind of decisions, like you can have school or you can't have school, where does that really get worked out? Do you know?
That I don't know because everything I've watched a lot of our state superintendent who would do like weekly messages kind of
Yeah.
he still probably does, but I only watched the beginning ones, and that he kept emphasizing that a lot of it is, kind of that local control, and it had to do a lot with how we were educating kids during this time. And so that's why I won't be surprised if it's like, here's multiple proposals, and here's your options, and then based upon your communities, I mean, they'll still be looking at numbers. I'm sure that they'll decide based upon what fits for your community.
Mhm.
But there's so
Mhm.
many factors that, I mean, school is so intertwined with things like, sports as well. And, just all kinds of things that, to make all those things mesh
Right.
together, I can't imagine. I'm just prepared to do what they tell me to do.
You're a good soldier that
Yeah,
way then.
whatever
I
they
like
want,
that.
I'll do what they want. So
Yeah. Speaking of sports, though, you had done some tennis coaching
yeah, a little
over the
bit.
last couple of years, but you were not able to do any of that because that's a spring sport, is it not?
It is, and I had actually already resigned, and
Oh,
so I
okay.
wasn't going to coach this year. I would have done a middle school tennis program the last like 3 weeks of school, which
Right.
would have been fun. But yeah, I definitely missed that, and I still am involved with playing some tennis with some people, in the
Right.
community. We've been waiting for these different, phases, and so Chris Mahler and I got to play the other Saturday, and I probably overdid it. I think we played for like 2.5 hours Saturday morning, and I was like, that was
Mhm.
the first time out in a couple months, and like I got home and barely could stand up, but that was a good. But
Hey, man, that's what the weekend warrior does.
there you go. Yeah, I
You
guess
know,
so.
sit down and pull every muscle in your body.
That's
You
right. Yeah.
know,
Well, yeah. I'm not even that. I'm getting old, but well, you can tell by the beard. I mean, I probably should be the gray. My niece looked at the beard and was like, "What's all that silver stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's gray hair." And so, but yeah. So as I get older, I can't just go run around and be crazy like I have in the
right.
past. But
Yeah. So you've taken advantage of the time off because normally I haven't seen you with the beard and it's an epic beard. I got to
oh,
tell you
yeah.
that. So,
Well, so the story, and I tell this, and so some of the people have probably heard this, but when we left school, I told the kids, like, hey, I'll make videos, and who knows? And I just threw out things like, hey, maybe I'll let the beard grow and you can check in each week to see how it gets. And so I
right.
just kind of went with that. And so I would do a couple little updates, and I post videos to my YouTube channel for school. And some of them are
Uh-huh.
like instructional, obviously, but then I try to make a few silly ones. And one of them I made where I could do it here, but I take my beard and I just kind of puff it up a little bit
Right.
because now it gets really, I could get in here. Now
Oh,
it gets
yeah.
really kind of crazy. And then
Yeah.
I go like this with my hair and kind of go like this. And I told the kids, like, if you walk into Lowe's and you look like this, they help you really quickly. Like, if you just say, hey, where do you find that? Like, keep your eyes like bugged out a bit. Like,
Uh-huh.
they'll take care of you in an instant. Like, it's
Mhm.
the number one way to just like get helped anywhere. So it's good.
I like that. Actually, when you start fluffing that up like that, it looks like it burns you. It suddenly I was looking at like 1908 or
Oh
something.
yeah, it could be for sure.
You
Yeah,
yeah,
I
you
told
could
Tyler earlier
scan
it's
time.
possible that I could be like if I did have to be homeless, that I could just kind of start right away, like look in the park. Like it wouldn't take much
Right.
for me to like be like out on the street and going, I think that guy's homeless. And so that's I kind
Yeah.
of just figured why not be prepared because
Well,
things
we
are
are creating more of a center here in Moses Lake,
great. Yeah,
locationally for homeless, but
right. That's good.
which is a big topic in itself. I think that's a fascinating one. Just dealing with the homeless population and depending. You talk about arguing and being able to hear other sides or the lack thereof in those arguments, and that one particular is tough because certain people have a point of view that we've got to provide, and not that we shouldn't as Christians help, but we don't necessarily address the real situation. Like if somebody's drug abuse or alcoholism is involved in it, sometimes it's hard for people to be especially in the world, to say anything about anybody's personal behavior.
Right.
And so as a Christian, it's interesting because we are called ourselves to to really a strict life to honor the Lord, but how we apply that to the world is interesting. I think for me, a lot of the times I run into Christians, some of our trouble is that we try to apply the behavioral things of Christianity to the world at large when
Right.
they really have no interest in that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to do that. It's really only after the fact. But I don't know if you've ever run into that in your life with Christian people promoting just behavioral things and not necessarily Christianity. But
Yeah, we actually talk about that with our kids quite a bit too, because it's very easy because the things will pop up and it's like, oh, well, why do they do that? And it's like, well, if you don't have the Holy Spirit and you don't, I mean, that's going to seem fine to you. So just, trying to do it this way or say this is the way you should do it is often going to fall on, deaf ears to some degree because
absolutely.
there's
So
no
tell
way.
me a little about, speaking of the Holy Spirit and the Lord and all things. What can you tell me about your own? I know we've shared a little bit, but for others at large, your own faith journey, with the Lord, how that kind of started for you, that kind of walking and believing that Jesus was more than just a swear word or a name that somebody might throw out here or there.
Yeah. So I grew up for most of my like life in a Christian home. So it was probably like mid elementary school and my parents probably were, they were raised a little bit going to church, but they both, they would have, you know, maybe not been walking with the Lord. And so they went, my mom started going to church, and then she gave her life, and then my dad shortly after that. And so it was different because it was like definitely I've been able to watch my parents over their life, just the sanctification process, but or even for myself too, obviously. But so elementary school, I accepted Jesus, I was baptized, and I tell kids, and I share this, I think I share it a lot. They could, ask, but I would always do a really good job of like outwardly doing all the things that I should do as like a middle school, high school Christian kid. And I went to Sunday school. I did all the things. I would, be a part of youth group and knew all the answers and all of those kind of things. But and this is like a common story, I think, or I hear it from others too, that
Right.
I went off to college, and there were just times where I just, I outwardly would do one thing and secretly do a different thing. And it was, probably not until I was, even into my early 20s that, it started to be like, wait a second, your walk and what, like your personal, like by yourself time, or even with some people, doesn't match like some of the things that you would espouse or say or do in front of certain people. And so it definitely noticed in my life during, kind of those dry times in the, maybe late teens, early 20s. And again, still going to different things, like still going to, college youth groups and things like that, but just wasn't where it was like, God, I was like definitely kind of pulling away. So in those early 20s, I can see now like a clear, I mean, even before that, but from there forward, a sanctification journey of just like understanding more of God's love and what that means, and his forgiveness, and what's our motivation for anything that we do. It's not the checking off my list, although that can be pretty easy to do, but you
Right.
know so yeah.
So would you consider yourself um, a Christian? I mean, prior to that sense of connection with that, did
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you had died, I mean, if you had, let's say you jumped, you were cliff jumping and you drowned or hit a rock and died, would you have gone to heaven at that point as you look back at that?
Yeah, I would say yes. Like I believe even to that younger age, I just can look back and know that I was like just really going my own way on certain things. And I would feel convicted about it. Like there was no absence of, being
Mm,
convicted
okay.
of things. It wasn't like I was like, oh, how dare, God can't tell me what to do. There was none of that. It was more just like, well, it was outward, and then here's a different part of my life, and then definite conviction, but just that it repeated itself. There were too many things that seemed like they would repeat themselves too often, and
Right.
so there wasn't. I didn't see like now I look back and I can see victories in a lot of areas of my life where it used to be this way, and now it's not that way. And there's really you can't really explain it as like, oh, I just really worked hard at it, because it
Right.
doesn't make sense to think that way for me.
Well, no, yeah, and working hard at it is that's a
Well,
whole
yeah.
different thing or a different perspective of looking at it. I would ask, out of that, how do you or what would you say to a younger person then, if they're in that spot? Because I think that place of living two lives, and going, well, I kind of feel bad, but I'm drawn to the world. And obviously when we're younger, as a young person, we have, more vitality, we're not, maybe we're not as seasoned or whatever it is, but there's a greater draw to that, a greater attraction, and you might be in places where those things are around you, but is there something you could, looking back now, any wisdom to offer to say, hey, if you're in that place, here's a perspective that might help you turn from that or find the strength of the Lord to be different in those moments? I mean, is there any advice you'd give to your younger self that was 20 now as you look back?
Yeah, there's maybe a couple things, and again, I don't know if it would, how it would, how the younger person would take it, but
I don't know.
yeah, I always, and I even share this when I talk to kids, is that God's design is perfect, and so I can look back and see the times where I wanted it to be Jason's design, and it just wasn't. It wasn't good, and it's like, and there's so many different things that the world throws at you, whether it's sexuality stuff or what you consume or whatever it is, that it seems like it's good in the moment, but like the design for what God has in, in his word is so perfect and so good. And then I go back all the time to now, like, the fruits of the spirit, just thinking about, is this love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, because there's just certain areas where this wasn't good, or this wasn't the most loving, or things like that. And so I guess just knowing that from the other side of it is that there's obviously, all of us have tough times and difficult struggles, and we probably always think like, well, I'm probably the only one going through this, and none of that's ever true. That you're the only one, and that, again, that God's design is so perfect. Every time you start reading through it in God's word, you're just like, oh yeah, there it is. I mean, I just take the, like, thinking of marriage and things like that. Like, the world skews, marriage and dating and all those things to a certain way. And, and again, I'm not going to say that it's easy or anything like that, because some people might have to be,
Oh,
unmarried
marriage?
forever. Like,
Marriage is super easy, dude.
what's that?
Marriage is like marriage
Oh,
is
no, I meant like the waiting for the marriage part, meaning that marriage is
Ooh.
designed by God, and it's like with that
Yeah.
one person with very special, joining together of two become one. And the world pollutes that, and tells you like, no, 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 the design should be this way, and you could do this and that. But
Sure.
God's design in that, it's perfect. It's so good because of, the way that he planned it. Like,
Right.
it makes sense. But in the moment when you're 20 or whatever, and you're like looking at your life, and maybe you were dating somebody and they, it didn't work out, or, I mean, it seems like it's probably,
Mhm.
the end of the world. So it's easy for me to say, because, oh, you're married and all, and so I get that, because you're
Right.
old, I'm old and all that. But just that I keep going back to God's design is perfect. And
Mhm.
when we go outside of that, it creates some problems and, issues that, but
Well,
I,
yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. Like, if you can.
Yes, it makes a certain amount of sense.
Right.
I was wondering then, so do you think that for a person, there's only one person that God designs it, like you have like one person in the world
Uh,
that you can be
yeah, I
married?
don't know. That's a pretty circular kind of question, like that. Like, I don't know. Like, well, number one, it's not back to that whole, because when you get into that stuff, sometimes people will be like, it's like the whole "you complete me" Jerry Maguire, and it's like, in all of it, it's, God.
The human head weighs about 8 pounds. So,
That
and the human head weighs about
Oh,
eight
yeah, very
pounds.
good,
So
right. So it's the idea, it's into that, like, position of where, God completes you, and not needing to have another person
you're
complete.
not going to answer the question then?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I don't. We, God's plan is perfect. So if
Right. And your spouse is perfect,
there you go. Well, none of us are perfect, but I'm certainly.
except for your wife.
Well, yeah, there you go.
No, you learn enough not to say, you say, if your wife wants to say she has faults, that's fine. I'm not going to point any of them out.
There you go. It's good. Yeah,
I think that's safer.
there you
Learn that. So what's fatherhood been like for you, Jason?
go. It's good. It's like it flies by though. Like, if I'm a
Mhm.
really kind of sentimental person, and so I could get teased. I'll say this out to everybody, and some of the kids in class know. Like, I could cry, like you could tell me something right now, I could start crying, and it'd be like, everybody would be like, "What's wrong?" So I can get pretty sentimental, because my kids are now 15 and 12, and honestly, it feels like the snap of a finger from when they were 5 and 2, and just
Mhm.
little different things that we had done. Or, it's just, it's crazy that way.
Mhm.
But I love it, and I mean, I guess you wouldn't say anything different than that. But and it's good too, because you learn to just interact with people differently. Like, my kids aren't necessarily into the exact same things that I was into as a kid, and as a
Right.
parent, it'd be easy for me to be like, well, I did this and this and this, and it's really
Right.
not their thing, and that's okay. And just learning to navigate that and enjoy what they enjoy is good. And we just have two kids, and so it's, we get to spend a lot of time together, and so that's good too. I mean, I guess sometimes maybe everybody needs breaks. Probably people need breaks from me, but yeah, it's been a definite blessing all the way through. But I'm
Well, I think
also like a really, it's like a hard job, because I'm a really bad, as they call it, a helicopter parent. Like,
oh, are
uh,
you? Okay.
yeah, oh yeah, like, it's I'm we're yeah, I'm bad. Like, I'm want to know everything, and they
Mhm.
pretty protective in our bubble. And so,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I'll be okay like when they go off to college, because I'll be like, that much closer to retirement, and my wife and I will be like home together then. That'll be great. But the kids,
It
yeah,
ain't
like
that long, man. It's like 3 years.
I
So
know it's super fast. Like I don't know if I could, like, it's hard to even like understand it. And I don't think Facebook helps. So I think people in the past, you didn't take very many pictures in the past, and so it was like people grew older, and you kind of had like a couple pictures to go like, oh yeah, they used to look like that. Now like every day something pops up on Facebook from a memory of something Shannon
right.
posted, and so I'm like, oh my goodness, there he is 10 years ago, and he's this and that, and I'm like, 3 more years and he's off to college. So
Yeah.
yeah, you could get me like I said, you could get me emotional just now. But
Well, just thinking about it. Well, good. Yeah, I think a lot of it's, as you look at, through the years and through the generations, how parenting has changed in some ways, the involvement level. If I look to how my parents were involved with me and how I'm involved with my children, I find that you haven't you try to do things the best that you can, and you tend to do a bit of reactive parenting. If your parents did a thing that you didn't like, you tend to do the opposite, but it doesn't necessarily make it right in
right.
doing that. What I'm finding out though is that you learn, your children have a way of, like we all did. Like we have those moments when we can think back to we were a certain age and we were sort of self-aware. We kind of knew there was a world around us. We knew we were interacting with it in certain ways, and you had your life. And I think, parentally, you're always looking, especially modern parents and modern Christian parents, looking at your child's life in a much more involved way, and not realizing, okay, there's this human being that's growing up that is going to be, hopefully, Lord willing, able to live on their own and live their own life. And
Right.
so, what part we play in that along the way, I think I thought at some level I was playing one part in my children's life, and I've come to find out it wasn't exactly the part I thought I was playing. So I don't know, if your kids revealed anything to you about various things that you've either done or moments in the past that have meant something, and then you've looked at it and you said, oh, I never saw it like that. Has anything like that happened yet?
I don't know if they've had any revelations like that. Like
Mhm.
they might be watching, so I'll have to ask them after. But I haven't noticed anything particularly like that.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question, but they haven't come to me with anything yet. I think that might take them a little bit longer to be a little older to kind of look back and go, "Oh, Dad, when you did that or that." Yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and I can look back on my own, like, I mean, thinking of my own dad and thinking of like just, the memories that you have of like what it meant to just be the kind of dad that would roll around on the floor and play catch with the ball, or he'd be out there, when it was kids running races, he'd join in and run the race kind of thing, like
Right.
just trying to be active and be
Mhm.
a part of. And then that's hard because there's a lot of things where again, I want to do what I want to do, but having those times to say, no, no, what do they want to do, and what can I do with them, and that's important. But I mean, I hope they'll look back on that and be thankful and grateful. But
Well, I think so. I think my kids have said that. I think, no, I think you have to understand that we're not really perfect, but I do find what's interesting for me is that I've done, even unbeknownst to myself, some of the things my father has done because my nature is similar. There's things in me that are actually the same. So, you spoke about like wrestling around on the floor. Well, you have to be a kind of person to like to wrestle with people, because there's a certain the sort of nature of grappling like that. There's a physicality to it that you have to be comfortable with yourself. And
right,
I never, I was never super comfortable with that. And so I do hug my kids, but I do, we had a joke with my dad because he was comes from a family like non-touchers and his father probably, I don't know if his father ever hugged him or said much to him ever. And so we now do this thing where you hug, and then it's like, the first one that lets go loses, you know, and
yeah,
it's that uncomfortable spot of like, you should let go. But
right,
I feel that. So even with my kids, I have to understand when that happens to me, I'm going, okay, I'm a little resistant, I'm kind of in my own space, and I need to work out. So that's some of the stuff for me. But the interesting thing with my kids is for them to think about themselves, because I think with young people there's a place where you're just plowing forward all the time and you don't really think about what anything means. But depending on certain kids, they come to a place where they start thinking about what things mean. And my son is like me in that way, and so he's extremely introspective, and my daughter has some pretty good wisdom, but they do kind of that a little bit. And so now I'm getting like, Dad, I've thought about what you did and where I was at in that situation. So
oh, that's good. Yeah, those
my
would be
little
good
monsters.
conversations.
Yeah. What about, I know you do a kind of a cool video editing class? I don't know if that's exactly right. At school, you've been
Oh,
able to do that through the years.
I did it for a while and I
Okay.
haven't lately. So
Okay.
yeah, now it actually Jeff Ty, he could be listening, he's probably not listening, but he got to take it over. So years ago I started it, got it
Okay.
up and going, and then they, just gave it to him. And so that's okay though. So I'm all right with
Right.
that. But
Well, so
so
how
I
did you start that? So how did that originally begin was that your own interest, or they just needed somebody to do it?
Yeah, I think it was kind of my own interest. Yeah, I mean, Jeff and I way back started doing some video work for the church, and
Okay.
we started. We even at one point were professionals. We made a video that we got paid for the hospital. I think we did some
Mhm.
interviewing and like put it together. And I was like, hey, I got a paycheck. Uh, that was our
Cool.
only, that was our only paying gig though. So yeah, so I enjoyed the video editing and just getting
May I
good.
interrupt you for a second, though? You
Yeah,
mentioned about doing that for the church.
yeah,
Did we? We actually mentioned that today, and there was some thought that perhaps, and I don't know whether we overused volunteer help in terms of that. And I don't know if you don't necessarily have to answer that, whether that felt like, at some point you can have a skill, and especially in a church setting, and people start saying, "Hey, can you do this for me?" And it's like you're the neighbor or whatever that everybody wants to borrow your truck or
yeah.
whatever it is.
It actually did a little bit of that, which was okay. And I'm not good at saying no a lot of times. And one of the things I think with video things sometimes for some people, this is just a little of my perspective, is that there's a lot of time that kind of goes into it if you
Right.
don't really know what you want. So sometimes people would come with like, "Hey, we want a video for blank," and then it would be like, "Well, but what do you want?" Because I can film and edit, but I don't always have like I may have a creative idea, but do you have a creative
Got
idea?
a
And
vision for
is it
what you
something
want.
I
Yeah.
can do? And so there's a little bit of that that does make it a challenge, and then you
Right.
want probably more people involved that could be like because if you remember years back, and it was our
Mhm.
first kind of intro to the video editing. We did one of the Christmas programs where it was a lot of video based things, and I had edited. And it was cool. Like I still remember it super fondly. I mean, it was a crazy amount of hours, but it was so much fun. And I like,
Right.
that's so long ago now, and so I haven't done a whole lot
Mhm.
recently. I mean, I'd probably get back involved in it because it's fun if
Mhm.
especially if you have a team and people that enjoy it, and it's good then because
Mhm.
you have fun doing it because it's more of a hobby than it is really like, oh, it's a job kind of thing. But
Well, yes, and interesting, that's because that's where, we've been at. It's been a fascinating journey over the last couple of months at the church. When you shut down active services, we were there that first week. What are we going to do? What are we going to do for anyone? And so, we got people kind of jumping into the video world. And I don't necessarily have a great expertise in how to make something necessarily. I got ideas about what looks good, and you don't mind doing the front side of stuff and some creative parts of it. So we really look at it, and it's funny you say that, and I'm not putting you on the spot now that we need your help, but we are definitely, as we look forward, because the interesting thing is we're going to be opening services up in some way, like June 7th, but we want to continue this streaming ability to where you can continue to put out content, because the interesting conversation here is things may have changed forever, where where a church cannot just think, okay, we're going to stay a local presence inside our building and not do anything to the external world, because we've
yeah.
actually connected with people through all this. So,
Oh yeah,
uh,
for sure. And those are things that I mean I think are great, and they're just all different components. Like I even we were bringing that up or talking about that, and I was like, well, I don't have any like idea how to run live video stream kind of things,
mhm,
and I wasn't even like a lot of times if I was the person who had to do the whole thing by myself. I wasn't the best at setting up lighting or all of that. Like Jeff was really good at that. I always said I enjoyed like the editing and the chopping. Like I'm like the hatchet man, and I don't mind doing all that stuff because that fit my what I could do a little bit better. But
uh-uh,
yeah, no, but if you understand all the parts and you get a team that knows the parts, then it
right,
can work really well. I think because like I said, Jeff would come in and do like some lighting that would make it look like, people want to be interviewed. And then I might be like, I didn't do that very good. And so all those things really matter. But yeah. But we can produce things that are really cool. Like I bought a Mac computer just because I wanted to have, like
right,
editing ability. And so I have Final Cut Pro and I haven't even used it. So you
right.
could probably rope me into doing something.
Well, we're excited. I think what's neat about it is to just the opportunity to kind of grow and do cool things. And I just had a lot of fun because you get people involved. Like we've been doing some of these video announcements and bringing families in and saying, okay, you're going to do our announcements. And then I get to bring them in our little library. And, it's not like I'm an expert on the technology. But I love that part. And these people have this, they get to see what it's like. And the thing I've learned is like the editing in the background. There's so much work that goes into editing. I mean, people don't appreciate it until you suddenly there and you go, okay, he just spent like 12 hours putting together this deal. We filmed it in like an hour and a half and he spent another 10 hours, editing it. So I want to just say, a lot of times, I don't know whether people said it in the past, but the things that were done and have been done like you have done in the past, those were powerful, cool things that they really they were really meaningful. And so I just thank you for ever being involved in the ways that you have at church, Jason, you and your family. That's very significant. I had to comment, when we were talking about spouses and special people, someone said, well, no, you don't need a special someone. And then the other ones was, it's always safe to not criticize your spouse, especially in public, which I do know that. And then they did comment on our parenting, the best thing I've ever done. I mean, parenting is, I don't think I've necessarily been great at it. I think it's been a very powerful, moving experience.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
What do we say? Oh, I got to read this. This is from Debbie. She says, Jason has so many talents. Thank you for your service.
Oh, that's nice.
I was a part of those Christmas programs, and we definitely couldn't have done it without you and Jeff. So
it was fun. Everybody involved. It was so cool.
Yeah,
those were good. Those are super good times. I remember that so fun. So.
We want more of those. And that's always my plug. It's something Debbie and I learned, 15 plus years ago. We were confronted with, why are we at a specific church? What has brought us here? Because we'd already been here 7-8 years or something. And there was some changeover in the staff and different things. And you begin to say, well, why am I here? Does it matter that I'm here? And a wise fella at the time just said, the church is made up of the people. Sometimes the leadership and stuff, they'll change, but it's really this heart of community that you've been brought together with. And so we've always seen that, once you stay, you have this family. And if we're a good family, we might argue sometimes, but then we work it out and we don't hold it against people. We learn to forgive them and so forth. But
for sure.
Which is definitely true. Hey, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes. We had a question or two from the message that we've gone through. And what's neat about it is, Tyra and I have done a series for the last 5 weeks on Joseph, doing videos, which has been pretty cool. It's good to get better at that stuff. But I just love Joseph's story. It takes up like 13 chapters out of 50 in Genesis. It's like 25% of the entire book of Genesis is Joseph's story alone. And 8 chapters on it, like 18% of the entire book is just on the time when the brothers and Joseph get back together and to that quick end of what happens then. Right. It's interesting how the Bible works that, there's, and then 400 years of before Moses is like taken up in 8 verses. Right. So there's like, the writing of it is such that it's such a big deal. And I love that story, that talk of forgiveness, the dealing with the regret in our lives and reconciliation has been really powerful. And I love that. And I hope that people will continue. The neat thing about the videos you've even put up and on channels is that they exist and somebody can go back. And so I hope people continue to do that. But let's, if you've got that for us, Mario, can you bring up, McKenna had a question.
Hey everyone, thank you for your video, Mark. And you were talking about Genesis 45 and how Joseph had all the power, which was different compared to the 20 years prior when his brothers had all the power and they sold him into slavery. And you asked us the question, what would we have done in that position if we were Joseph and we had all the power? And I was just kind of curious to hear what you would have done if you were in that position.
All right. Thank you, McKenna. I always appreciate you being a faithful responder. And if anybody had any additional questions, you can put them in the comments and we'll take a look at those and try to answer them. But she was asking, it's from Genesis 45 specifically. And I had made a statement about the moment the shoe was on the other foot, where Joseph now was confronted, or his brothers were there and he had the power. 20 years earlier, they had the power. They throw him into the pit. They were mad at him, jealous of him, all these different things. And they throw him into the pit. They were going to kill him, but they don't. And he's gone. And, the whole story shows how much their remorse was, how they were affected by that all these years. They weren't hardened about it. They were saddened what they had done. They realized the gravity of the situation. But now Joseph is sitting there with the opportunity to inflict whatever judgment he wants on him, because he has all the power that would exist really in the world. And so McKenna sits and asks me now, well, what would I have done if I had that power? if suddenly the tables were turned on the people that had hurt me and I was in a position of power. I'll let you think about it, Jason. If you have an answer, you can speak to it. But um, I just have to say, McKenna, in my own life, there's times that I have been hurt by people, and they didn't really. I don't think they always meant it strongly, but it might have been a mild rejection. And my natural response was to protect the inside of me by shutting them out. And I'd say to myself, well, I'll never talk to that person again. I'll never deal with them again. They'll never hurt me again. And if I was an unbeliever and the tables were turned on those people, I would be pretty hard pressed to think that I wouldn't take out my judgment on them, that I wouldn't make them pay for what they had done, rightly or wrongly. I'm only thankful and resting in the hope that if I was confronted again, and I have occasionally with people that have wronged me but have wanted to be forgiven, that the Lord has made that space available for me to really forgive them. But my natural instinct is to protect myself. So I've got to immediately turn and say, all right, Lord, that's not what you want out of me. I need to be forgiving. So I suppose if I was back to my unbeliever state, you'd be better served that I didn't have all the power, I guess I'd answer. But Jason, have you ever had that where someone has maybe wronged you and then they've come back and asking for forgiveness? Do you recall of any time that's ever occurred to you?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that even as you were sharing yesterday, and I had and it was, and because I think it's even like I'm somebody who I think if anybody asks for forgiveness, and again, there are some extreme situations. Sometimes I like to think in like really like extreme situations that if somebody hurt my kids or my wife, it's a lot harder for me to think about what my response would be. I mean, I hope it would still be forgiving, but in life, like if somebody comes up and says, "Hey, will you forgive me for that?" I'm usually like, "Yeah, like that's awesome." I think reconciliation, forgiveness is the way to go. The tougher spot to me is when the other person doesn't want to, necessarily do that. And it made me think of a time, and it was hard, and it still really is seared into my head. And it would not be my first response. Is that I had a student who really kind of like threatened me in kind of a scary way. And I mean, it still is like seared in my brain. And even that night at home, I was like, kind of freaked out. Like, are they going to come to my house? And like, it was really like startling and kind of scary for me. And it got to, and the kid was, taken out of school and all of that. But
Right.
it took a few days, but then I kind of just had it laid on my heart that like, I have to forgive that kid as much as anybody. I mean, I can't just be like, no, the kid was, did something not, really bad, and I can't. And so I went back in, and it was a good opportunity too to the principal to say like, hey, look, I'm forgiven. I need to forgive, and this is hard for me. But bring him back, and he can come into my class. Like it's okay, like that's fine. And we had to have meetings and stuff because there were some issues with myself and the student a little bit beforehand, and so I knew that my part wasn't just perfectly like, oh, you're nothing, there was part of it was my issue too. And so but doing that is not my natural reaction. It takes some time, like for me sometimes. And so that's why I'm thankful when I don't respond in the moment to something, but then take that time to let the Holy Spirit really work on your heart and then come back at it, because it's so easy. And as a teacher, there's a lot of times where you might be like, and everybody probably has this in different jobs, where it's pretty easy to be, slighted, or somebody doing something, mean to you or say something to you. And it can be hard. And if I'm being honest, in my earlier days, it was a lot easier to respond very quickly with a sharp word back or things like that. And so, but again, that's that sanctification of the Lord working on your heart to just be able to have a calmness and a peace
Mhm.
that is different, because the world wants you to respond. I mean, the world revolves around responding, you know,
Right.
it's retribution. I mean, that it's like why there's all these like reality TV shows where people watch that they're just battling each other. And so we as believers, it's just like it's like I've been forgiven much, so then I'm going to be, forgiving to others, which
Right.
again, not always easy to do. I wouldn't say that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think it's so important, in a world that faces, a lot of issues. I mean, what will Christians do? What do we do in the world that's around us? Again, we are relating and caring for the body itself, but we are to present, to be at peace with the world and to show them that there's something different. That they'll know something is different by the very way we act. But that requires, a real submission of our will all the time. And it doesn't mean that you don't feel things. I think sometimes people have this funky notion that as a believer, you're not going to feel certain things, and you're not going to feel the desire for that. The thing I've come to think about a lot is that it really isn't sin, that we struggle with sin, I suppose, but it's not really sin. It's the temptation to sin, because when we sin as a believer, you immediately, you do not get the benefit out of it. You feel bad. You have conviction out of it. You're not like the world that used to be able to can do any sort of sinful, because sinful things are fun to the world. They really were. And they don't feel bad about it. But as a believer, suddenly all that thing pours on you. And what I've come to understand is that it's really about the temptation on the front end. That is the battle that believers have to fight, is to never give in to the thing. And that's the thing where we're really calling on the Lord. He understands our temptation. He understands what it's like to feel the desire to get revenge. But the Christian then has got to say, I'm not going to get revenge, because if I do it, I'm going to feel terrible. And that will be its own punishment in itself.
Right. Yeah.
My battle is to not go there in the first place. But that's the hard thing, whether it's a man in his lust. It's once he does it, he's going to feel terrible, and he's going to have all that conviction. The devil's going to pour on him. He's going to hate himself, everything. The battle is over temptation. When it first is confronted, that is where we have to confront all these things. And we got to show the world. I mean, like, you've got this situation, in Minneapolis, with a man that was killed by the police officers, unjustly. And that represents to everybody this continued idea of institutionalized racism in this country. And so we just got to go, okay, you got to pray, but we also have got to say, what's our message? What are we going to try to say to show love and kindness, for the world, to be different? Because in our own community, we don't have necessarily a large African-American community, but it's a large Hispanic and, Caucasian community. And there's a great deal of racism that goes in between those two things. There always has been. And so, I mean, for us, it's like, what are we going to do different as a believer? How do I express the love of Christ to try to show it's different? I can't fix those things, but we can show something different. And, Jason, I just got to say, I appreciate you as a teacher, as a Christian teacher, trying to exhibit Christ-like behavior to the world, because a lot of your students don't know anything about Jesus.
Yeah. And it's been, and that's like a journey for me, because like I said, my quick, nature to want to respond to things definitely would get the best of me, in earlier years. And it was, as you shared yesterday, I'm going to bring it up because I was immediately drawn to, which I think is coming up as far as the preaching schedule, Romans 12. So when you were talking about, revenge and all of that, I'm just going to bring it up, just the whole, like all of Romans 12. So I'm not going to, read the whole thing, but it's that,
And/or explain
don't be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And that's back to that, like, even amongst the people that see us and do things. And I like that. Don't be haughty or don't be prideful, because so much of the way that we want to respond is because it's, it's a slight against us, or it's like, this is the way I feel, or this is the way that, that it should be done. And so being in that humble posture, then like he's talked about, then being able to show love to the community that, or to the people around us. And humbleness doesn't think super highly of ourselves. And, it's like, again, I go back to that. I was trying to think of the phrase, but I'm first sinner and only second sinned against. It was in a book that we had done as a small group. And I just, it always, that if I remember that, that's like you said about the temptation at the front. If it's like, that I don't respond, like, especially when you're interacting with people, I know there's other things, but when those interactions are with people, just thinking about that, I don't repay that, evil for evil and things like that for that revenge piece. But anyways.
That's a good point. And again, one of the comments was just that there's a lot of that back and forth, people kind of ranting about their point of view, especially with the, coronavirus, how to deal with it, not to deal with it. And certainly as believers, we should be place number one to be caring for people and to, to speak softly, to listen first, and to be slow to anger and quick to listen and, slow to speak. And so those are good words. And we need to be different. We need to show things that way. I wanted to, as we're wrapping things up here today, first off, I want to again thank you, Jason, for participating, being with me today, and just sharing your heart and about where you're coming from. And we appreciate you, and the community of Moses Lake is better for you and your family being here. Absolutely. You made a serious difference. But I wanted to just specially remark my thanks to Mario. He has meant a great deal. I only knew him in maybe a distant way up until a couple of years ago when I started here at the church on the staff, and to get to know him and share his life and to see his talent and to see his life's journey, where the Lord has taken him, over the last 20 years, as a volunteer trying to just love people, and then seeing this opportunity come for him to be the media guru, excuse me, and leadership person in that area for Sendero Church, and we're just excited for him. And so, Mario, I just as we close, I just want you to know that we're going to continue to pray for you and to just offer our blessing. And we'll have you back because we're going to need your expertise in things here. There's no doubt about it. We'll be contracting you back. But I just want to encourage you, to continue to follow the Lord, to put him first, and to just be thankful. And I've seen that. Your gratitude overflows, but just let that be the hallmark of your life, that you're just thankful for what God has done and what you're able to do, and to use your talents and gifts for blessing people. And honestly, I'd give that response to all of you that are listening and will ever hear this, is that we have an opportunity in this life to really live either for ourselves or live for something greater, specifically someone greater. And the Lord Jesus Christ has offered us an opportunity in our lives to live for things that matter. And following him and the life that he asks us to live is the one that will make the most difference. So if you don't know him, I'd ask you to reach out. If you don't know anything about it, reach out to us. We'd be glad to hear from you. We'd be glad to share more about Jesus with you, to share the gospel message with you. If you've got a trusted person in your life that's already a believer that maybe has been praying for you, reach out to them. But just understand, you're not alone. The Lord is always with us, and we are desirous always to be part of your life. So God bless you. Thanks again, Jason, Mario, Tyler. We just appreciate all we've been doing with this, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. So God bless you and take care.